The Indiana Fever walked away with their fifth straight win, but if you looked past the final score, the cracks in the foundation were glaring, and Sophie Cunningham was at the center of it all. On paper, this should have been an easy feel-good moment. A win streak extended, fans in high spirits, and a veteran shooter delivering a masterclass from beyond the arc. Sophie Cunningham wasn't just good in this game. She was surgical. She hit 80% of her threes, reading the defense like a seasoned sniper, moving without the ball, and making Seattle pay every single time they gave her an inch of space. But here's where the story turns. Instead of riding the hot hand, if you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe. Instead of feeding the one player who was making the game look effortless, the Fever fell into a spiral of bad habits. They ignored her, they missed her, and worst of all, they acted like her performance wasn't even happening. The numbers don't lie. The decision-making did. When a player is torching the net like Cunningham was, basketball 100, and 1 says you keep feeding her. You run sets to get her open. You find her in transition, and you force the defense to prove they can stop her. That's not just smart basketball. It's basic common sense. Yet, for reasons that defy logic, the Fever's offensive possessions often ended with contested jumpers from cold shooters, rush drives into traffic, or unnecessary isolation plays. The glaring example? Kelsey Mitchell, normally one of Indiana's most reliable scorers, couldn't buy a basket. She went 3 for 16 from the field, and a staggering 0 for 8 from deep. Instead of adjusting, Mitchell kept shooting. Instead of saying, "Sophie's on fire, let's get her the ball," the team doubled down on broken possessions. It wasn't just frustrating to watch. It was infuriating to someone like Cunningham, who was watching possession after possession die without even touching the ball. The coaching problem. Let's not sugarcoat this. A big part of the blame falls on the coaching staff. A head coach has one of the simplest but most important responsibilities in moments like this: recognize a hot hand and build the offense around it. In this game, that adjustment never came. No specific play calls to free Cunningham. No structured ball movement to swing the defense and find her in her sweet spots. Instead, the offense looked like it was on autopilot, just cycling through the same predictable sets regardless of who was shooting well or who was struggling. This is where you lose games you should win, and in this case, it almost happened. The collapse that almost was. For most of the night, Indiana looked like they had control, but basketball has a way of punishing teams that don't close properly. With 5 minutes left, the Fever were in command. Then Seattle went on an 11-0 run, slicing the lead and threatening to flip the game on its head. And what happened during that run? Possession after possession of low-percentage shots, no ball movement, and Sophie Cunningham standing wide open on the perimeter while the ball never found her. It was the perfect storm of poor decision-making and lack of awareness, and it nearly turned a comfortable win into an embarrassing collapse. Sophie's frustration is justified. It's easy to look at the win and shrug this off. But for someone like Sophie, who's been in the league long enough to understand how fleeting these moments can be, this is exactly the kind of thing that sticks with you. She wasn't demanding the ball out of ego. She wanted it because she was the best option on the floor. That's what leaders do. They step up when they're hot and take pressure off struggling teammates. The problem was, her teammates didn't seem to recognize it, and the coaches didn't enforce it. From her perspective, this wasn't just a missed opportunity to pad her own stats. It was a missed opportunity for the team to execute winning basketball the right way. The basketball IQ question. This game raised a bigger, more uncomfortable question about the Fever. Do they have the collective basketball IQ to maximize their talent? It's one thing to play hard and hustle, and the Fever do that, but the great teams also play smart. Playing smart means recognizing when someone's hot and feeding them until the defense stops them. It means adjusting mid-game when your primary scorers are ice cold. It means having the self-awareness to pass up a bad shot because you know there's a better one waiting 2 passes away. Indiana didn't do that in this game, and against a better opponent, it would have cost them. Kelsey Mitchell's off night becomes a teaching moment. Mitchell is too good a player to have nights like this often, but when she does, the adjustment has to be immediate. Shooters are taught to keep shooting, but there's a difference between shooting through a slump and shooting your team out of a game. On this night, she needed to recognize it wasn't her night and shift into facilitator mode. Drive and kick. Use her gravity to pull defenders and create space for Sophie. It's not about ego. It's about doing whatever it takes to win. Team chemistry under the microscope. When moments like this happen, they're often a symptom of deeper issues in team chemistry. Does the team trust each other enough to deviate from the usual pecking order? Are they willing to let someone else take the spotlight for a night? For Indiana, this game suggested those questions aren't fully answered yet. And if they want to make real playoff noise, they're going to have to answer them fast. The leadership gap. Every great team has a vocal leader on the floor who can command the offense in real time. Someone who can yell, "Get her the ball," when they see a mismatch or a hot shooter. Right now, Indiana doesn't seem to have that presence. Caitlin Clark, as the team's rising superstar, could eventually fill that role, but in her absence or on nights when she's not in takeover mode, someone else needs to step up. Cunningham could be that voice, but the system and culture have to support it. Looking ahead, the Fever are in a good place record-wise, but if they want to be taken seriously as a playoff contender, they can't afford to have games like this where they ignore the obvious. They need to make in-game adjustments faster, recognize momentum swings, and know how to ride the hot hand. Because here's the truth. When you're in the postseason, every possession matters. There's no room for possessions wasted on ego shots or ignoring the one player who's burying everything in sight. This was a win, yes, but it was also a warning. The Fever survived because Seattle didn't have the firepower to make them pay for their mistakes. But against the league's top teams, that won't fly. Sophie Cunningham's frustration is more than justified, and if the Fever are smart, they'll treat this as a wake-up call. You can't waste performances like hers. You can't ignore the hot hand. And you can't expect to win big games when your best shooters are watching from the corner while contested bricks go up. The Fever got lucky this time, but if they don't learn from it, luck will run out. And when it does, it'll be the same mistakes, the same lack of awareness, and the same stubborn decision-making that will send them home early. What made Sophie Cunningham's night so baffling wasn't just her shooting percentage. It was how she got those shots. Most of them weren't the result of set plays or designed looks. They came from pure hustle, clever relocation, and her own ability to read where the defense would break down. She would hit a big three in rhythm. Then on the next two possessions, she'd run herself open again, only to be standing there, hands ready, watching the ball swing somewhere else. The camera caught a couple of times. Sophie clapping for the ball, clearly in position, while her teammates forced up contested drives or off-balance pull-ups. That's the kind of thing that gnaws at a veteran player. The hot hand rule that everyone ignored. Any coach worth their clipboard will tell you. If a player is shooting lights out, you make it your mission to keep them fed until the defense figures out how to stop them. But here, it felt like Indiana didn't even try to make Seattle adjust. There was no urgency to run Sophie off multiple screens, no staggered action to free her in the corners, no flare screens to punish Seattle for collapsing on the paint. The Fever essentially said, if she gets the ball, fine. If not, oh well. That's not championship-level thinking. That's street ball logic. Mitchell's off night wasn't just bad luck. Kelsey Mitchell is an elite scorer, no question. But this game wasn't just a slump. It was a stubborn slump. She wasn't missing open shots because of a cold hand. She was forcing shots into traffic, pulling up too early in the shot clock, and driving straight into two defenders without a plan. When you go 0 for 8 from 3, there's a point where you have to ask yourself, what else can I do to help my team win tonight? That's where the disconnect happened. Mitchell didn't switch into a facilitator role, and the offense suffered for it. Imagine if she had. Drawing the defense on drives, kicking out to Sophie for clean looks, or initiating swing passes that ended with her in a better spot. The game could have been put away much earlier. Instead, the Fever gave Seattle life they didn't need to give. The coaching staff's blind spot. Basketball is about recognizing the flow of the game. And this game was screaming for one adjustment. Ride Sophie Cunningham until the Storm proved they can stop her. But the Fever's play calling didn't reflect that. They stuck to the same offensive schemes, ignoring the fact that one player was in a different shooting universe from the rest of the team. It's not just about favoritism. It's about cold, hard percentages. If one player is hitting 80% from deep and everyone else is at 0, the math is telling you what to do. Good teams trust that math. Great teams weaponize it. Indiana didn't do either. The fourth quarter collapsed scare. With 5 minutes left and a double-digit lead, this game should have been iced. Instead, the Fever allowed Seattle to rip off an 11-0 run. Every one of those empty Fever possessions had the same theme: rush shots, poor ball movement, and Sophie Cunningham nowhere near the action. It was basketball déjà vu. We've seen this from other teams who ignore their rhythm shooter and get burned late. The only reason Indiana didn't blow this game is because Seattle couldn't quite finish the comeback. Against a playoff-caliber team, this would have been a disaster. Team chemistry questions. Moments like this expose cracks in team chemistry. When a teammate is on fire, finding them should be instinctual. You shouldn't need a coach screaming from the sideline. But in this game, the Fever played like a group of individuals, not a unit reading each other's moments. That's why Sophie's frustration matters. It's not just about one night. It's about the unspoken trust and recognition that winning teams develop. If she can't rely on her teammates to recognize her hot hand, it's a sign that communication and basketball IQ needs serious work. Why this matters for playoff basketball. The WNBA postseason is brutal. Defense is tightened, possession slowed down, and every mistake is magnified. In those environments, the ability to identify and ride the hot hand can be the difference between advancing and going home. If the Fever ignore these warning signs, they're setting themselves up to fail in high-pressure moments. You can't afford to waste elite performances like Sophie's, not when the margins are razor-thin. What Sophie's night should have looked like. In a perfectly run game, Sophie would have ended this night with 10 or 12 three-point attempts. Not half that. The Fever should have spammed horn sets to get her moving across the baseline, used double screens to free her up at the top, and run constant weak side action to shake her loose. By doing that, they would have forced Seattle to send extra defenders her way, opening up the very drives and lanes that Mitchell and others were trying to force all night. It's called playing chess instead of checkers, and Indiana didn't even set up the board. Sophie's role going forward. This game might actually change things for Cunningham. Her performance, and the glaring mismanagement of it, could push her into a more vocal leadership role. It's one thing to be a role player who gets hot occasionally. It's another to prove you can carry the offense for long stretches and then have the credibility to demand the ball in the future. If Sophie embraces that role, it could be a turning point, not just for her, but for the Fever's offensive identity. The accountability question. When the film session for this game happens, there needs to be honest conversation. Why was the hot shooter ignored? Why did the offense force so many bad looks when a high-efficiency option was available? If the Fever sweep this under the rug just because they won, they're missing the point. Championship teams use these moments as teaching tools. Average teams brush them aside and hope they don't come back to bite them. The bigger picture for Indiana. Right now, the Fever have talent. They have momentum. They have a fan base that's starting to believe. But the gap between being a fun regular season team and a legitimate contender is closing games the right way. That means knowing when to adapt, when to ride the hot hand, and when to set egos aside for the sake of the scoreboard. This win against Seattle was a reminder that Indiana is still learning that balance. Sophie Cunningham gave them a blueprint. Now it's up to them to follow it before the next close game turns into a loss they can't afford. The Indiana Fever got away with one here, not because the scoreboard says it, they still won, but because the game tape shows clear evidence of a team that doesn't yet understand situational basketball at the highest level. And in the WNBA, that's the difference between being fun in June and being relevant in September. Breaking down the missed opportunities. Fourth quarter, about 6:30 left. Fever are up by double digits. Sophie's hit another deep three from the wing. Seattle calls timeout. This is the moment where any decent coaching staff should be in the huddle saying, they can't guard her. Run X. Too flare until they figure it out. But when play resumes, the Fever run an isolation set for Mitchell, who at that point was 2 for 13. with no movement away from the ball. Shot clock ticks down. Contested jumper, brick. Sophie's in the strong side corner, waving for the swing pass. Didn't happen. Next possession. Sophie runs baseline to shake her defender. She gets a step of separation, open for about 2 seconds. Instead of kicking out, the ball handler forces a drive into a help defender, gets blocked, and the Storm grab the rebound. These are not small errors. These are decision-making breakdowns that give momentum to the other team. Seattle's comeback was built on Fever mistakes. It's worth noting that Seattle didn't do anything revolutionary in that late run. They just took what Indiana gave them, and Indiana gave them plenty. Poor shot selection, lazy passes, no urgency to value possessions. It's almost like the Fever thought the game was over with 5 minutes still on the clock. That's the hallmark of a team that hasn't yet developed that killer instinct. Great team sense when the other side is wobbling and finish them off. The Fever left the door wide open. The value of the hot hand beyond points. This isn't just about Sophie's box score. When you feed the hot hand, you change the defensive geometry of the game. Seattle would have been forced to send an extra defender her way or extend their coverage beyond the arc. That means more open lanes for Boston inside, more driving space for Mitchell, more kick-out opportunities for secondary shooters. By ignoring Sophie, Indiana actually made life harder for their struggling scorers. They allowed Seattle to collapse into the paint and contest drives without fear of a kick-out bomb. In other words, they took away their own best weapon. Kelsey Mitchell's off night. The ripple effect. Mitchell's shooting struggles weren't just a problem for her stat line. They altered the entire flow of the offense. Instead of recognizing it wasn't her night and shifting into a playmaking mindset, she kept pressing. The ripple effect was obvious. Fewer ball reversals, more stalled possessions, and a drop in overall energy when shots clanged off the rim. The thing about great scorers is that they can still impact a game without scoring, but only if they're willing to adapt. That's the growth opportunity for Mitchell here. The coaching silence was deafening. One of the most glaring aspects of this game was the absence of any visible adjustment from the bench. When you have a player shooting 80% from three, you don't just hope they get open. You manufacture those openings. That's what play design is for. Even a simple two-man game with Sophie and Boston could have created mismatches, forced switches, and kept Seattle scrambling. Instead, Indiana ran the same vanilla sets they've been running all night, as if the shooting numbers didn't exist. The leadership void. This game also highlighted something else. There's no one on the floor consistently taking control of situations like this. Clark has shown flashes of being that vocal floor general, but in her absence or when she's not in full takeover mode, someone else has to fill that leadership gap. Veterans like Cunningham could step into that role, but that requires both the willingness to demand the ball and the trust of teammates to give it to her. Right now, that trust seems shaky, and that's an issue. The playoff implications. If this were just a regular season mid-table matchup, maybe it's not such a big deal. But the Fever are positioning themselves as a playoff team. And in the playoffs, you cannot waste performances like this. The games are too close. The margin's too small. Ignoring your hot hand because you're stuck in a rigid offensive flow will get you bounced. Opponents in the postseason will punish that in a heartbeat. Film room accountability. When this game hits the film room, the tape will tell the truth. The missed kickouts, the ignored open looks, the forced shots from cold shooters. This is where accountability has to happen. If the coaching staff just says, "Good win, let's move on," they're setting themselves up for history to repeat itself. They need to pause, break down exactly where the decision-making fell apart, and make it crystal clear. When someone's rolling, you feed them until the wheels fall off. The danger, we won, so it's fine. Winning can be dangerous when it masks bad habits. This is one of those games where the final score hides the real story. If the Fever chalk this up as just another W, they'll miss the fact that they came within 1 or 2 possessions of letting it slip away. And those possessions were avoidable mistakes. Complacency after wins is how teams plateau. Championship teams learn as much from close wins as they do from close losses. That's the mentality Indiana has to adopt if they want to take the next step. Sophie Cunningham's takeaway. For Sophie, this game should be a confidence builder, but also a turning point. She proves she can carry the scoring load when she's locked in. The next step is making sure her teammates and coaches use that weapon. That might mean being more vocal on the court. It might mean having those uncomfortable locker room conversations about recognition and trust. It might even mean lobbying the coaching staff for more sets designed around her when she's hot. Because as good as she was in this game, her impact could have been even greater, and she knows it. What needs to change before the next game? Prioritize the hot hand. Don't just let the offense flow randomly. Identify who's cooking and get them the ball. Improve situational awareness. Late game possessions matter. Value every one of them. Adjust play calling. If something's working, keep running it until the defense proves it can stop it. Shift roles on cold nights. Scorers need to know when to switch from shooter to facilitator. Build trust in role players. Everyone needs to believe that the best shot can come from anyone, not just the stars. The Fever got the win, but they didn't get the lesson, at least not yet. This was a game that could have easily been a loss if Seattle had just a little more firepower. And the root cause would have been simple: ignoring the obvious. Sophie Cunningham gave them a textbook example of why you ride the hot hand. If Indiana wants to be taken seriously in the playoff race, they'll start taking notes. If they don't, they'll keep learning the hard way. And eventually, the margin for error will disappear.